I'm Doug Chiang. I'm the Vice President and Executive Creative Director for Lucasfilm.
I'm Amy Beth Christenson, and I'm an art director at Lucasfilm.
And today we're going to talk about every kind of starfighter in the live-action Star Wars films.
And we do mean every starfighter. Bit hammy, I'm sorry.
No, that's good. I like it.
Always wanted to fly one of these things.
There are many different classes of starships, from capital ships, like Star Destroyers, to space stations, like the Death Star.
That's no moon. It's a space station.
But typically, we define a starfighter as a small spacecraft designed specifically for combat.
Spaceship designs in Star Wars is really, really tricky, and that's because we have to give these spaceships personality. They have to have a distinct look, they have to have a distinct iconic shape, and that's where I think George was brilliant in terms of creating iconic shapes for Star Wars. TIE fighters, they're one of the most iconic designs in the Star Wars universe. And what I like about it is the simplicity of it. It's just a ball with wings. The original design for the TIE fighter was presented by George to Ralph McQuarrie in 1974.
I think all of the ships in Star Wars, you can kind of do that shorthand, like almost a stick figure version of it. And this TIE fighter is great because it's the H with the ball on it.
Yes.
So as long as it's coming towards you, you recognize it as a TIE fighter.
I remember when I first saw it when I was 15, part of the visual was so strong, but I loved the sound of it. It was just an amazing, unexpected sound.
7.35. I see them.
The first time we see Darth Vader's TIE Advanced is in the trench run at the end of A New Hope.
And one of the fun facts about it in terms of design is that George wanted it to look very distinguished, very different in terms of giving it a very distinct silhouette. The wings are folded in to kind of evoke power and menace.
Have you not?
The T-65 X-Wing is a really fascinating design. I love the fact that it evokes World War II aircraft design in terms of the form language. And I also like the idea that it has a long snout. George was a huge race car fan, and he loved the idea that the dragsters had a very long nose. And so in some of the early prototypes from Colin Cantwell, you can see the same painted nose.
Great thing about the X-Wing is seeing Star Wars for the first time. It was kind of the first time you saw a ship transform. When you get the S-foils being locked in attack position, that's when it makes its X silhouette shape, and it was really fun to see.
One of the reasons why the X-Wing is so iconic is that Joe Johnston, when he drew it and designed it, I mean, he made it very graphic. It was very easy to understand. It was very easy to draw very quickly. And there's a timeless quality to it that's very hard to do. The Y-Wing.
The first time we see a Y-Wing is when they arrive on Yavin Base.
One of the fun things about the Y-Wing was that George wanted it to look like a race car without all of its paneling. And so you can see that the cockpit has the sleekness of a race car, but then the engines and the body have all the panels removed. The design actually evolved quite a bit because of the blue screen technology. The very thin struts were very hard to photograph. And so Colin Cantwell actually beefed them up and gave it a more stronger World War II robustness.
We were able to design the fully covered Y-Wing where you got to see it in its complete form before you see it in A New Hope. The design for the TIE Bomber is really unique because this is the first time we saw two pods next to each other with kind of this TIE Advanced wing setup. It still felt more menacing, and then you got a hint at what it does when they were trying to bomb the Falcon and the asteroid field.
The A-Wing. The first time we see the A-Wing is in Return of the Jedi. And it's one of my favorite designs because it's so fast and it's very sleek. And in many ways, it's the bare essence of speed because you just have a cockpit with engines and a wing. And I love the triangular look of it because it just looks fast.
The A-Wing for me is really interesting because it's one of the first time we saw a really rounded shape, for the fighters at least. And I thought that made it really unique looking.
Lock S-foils in attack positions.
B-Wing from Return of the Jedi.
One of the fun things about the B-Wing design is that it's a transforming design. The fact that it's almost a flying wing, but then it goes vertical. And I love the idea that the cockpit actually rotates. And it's the first time we've seen that. And the whole thinking about that is that when it's flying, it's actually a very interesting configuration than when it's landed.
Fighters coming in.
The TIE Interceptor. What's great about this design is the next evolution of the TIE Fighter.
The TIE Interceptor is one of my favorite ship designs.
And one of the interesting things is that we took the wings and stretched it so that it made it look more forward propelling. And then by doing that, though, we had to actually give it a slot so the pilot could actually look left and right. The Naboo N-1 Starfighter. One of the challenges of designing that was that we actually had to figure out a design history for Star Wars. And George wanted to mirror that design history with our real-world design. And so, for instance, the original trilogy designs of the X-Wing and the Y-Wing were more in the 1970s, the more manufactured look, the more angular look. And so episodes 1, 2, and 3 actually went back to the 1920s, a more romantic time, more handcrafted, artisan look for the design of the spaceships.
An astromech droid does fit in there? Or?
And this one it does.
Okay.
I know, that's one of the fun things about designing for Star Wars is that we can take a lot of liberties. And part of the sleekness of the N1 is that you really can't get an astromech behind the cockpit. And so if you notice it, it's just R2's dome. His legs are somewhere inside the body.
The other important thing about the Naboo Starfighter is that Doug designed it. The Trade Federation Vulture droid, and the first time we see this is Episode 1, Phantom Menace. The thing that's really cool about this is the first time we see a starfighter in Star Wars that is a droid.
And at first, originally, it wasn't supposed to be a droid. I remember George actually wanted to start to connect the idea of the designs from Episode 1 to Episode 4. And so this was going to be a precursor to the TIE Fighters. And that's why you see the distinct wing configuration and the central ball body. The Geonosian Starfighter, we first see that in Attack of the Clones. And what's interesting about this design is that George is a huge race boat fan, and so he wanted to mirror and design a vehicle that looked kind of like the F1 speedboats, and that's where you get the twin pontoons. And what I did was turn them vertically.
And the great part about the design of the Geonosian Starfighter is that you really see that it's designed by the Geonosians. They're bug-like creatures, so they have their own distinct look to their vehicles.
And one of the fun things is that when I was designing it, I wanted to make sure that the spaceship actually looked almost like part of the Geonosians, and so that's where the cockpit is really small. It's almost like a helmet. The Jedi Starfighter. At this time, George wanted to blend and blur the lines. So you can see here, even though these are Jedi ships, we actually kept them very triangular to sort of evoke a little bit of the transition towards the Empire Star Destroyers. And one of the fun things was that I remember George saying, let's just take a Star Destroyer and turn it into a fighter ship. That was such a bold statement. At first, I didn't think it would work until I actually saw it on paper, and it actually works beautifully.
This little nerdy part where it doesn't have hyperspace capabilities, so it needs a hyperspace ring to go into hyperspace.
We're on your tail, General Kenobi.
The ARC 170 Starfighter, and the first time we see this is in Revenge of the Sith. My favorite part about this design are the multiple wings of the different designs. They're really cool.
And it's actually a precursor to the X-Wing, so the multiple wings sort of start to hint at the X-Wing S-foil folding out. But then the interesting thing is that you'll notice that there are multiple cockpits and pilots and gunners, and that's to call back to the original inspiration for this, which was the Douglas Dauntless fighter bomber.
This is the droid Tri-Fighter, and the first time we see this is in Revenge of the Sith.
One of the interesting things about this is it's the next evolution of droid starfighter ships. And it's very aggressive, and it's distinctly designed to look mean and menacing. General Grievous' Starfighter. What's interesting about this is that this is the most automotive of all the starfighters. And you'll notice that the cockpit is set way back, and you have this long hood, sort of connoting power and engine, and the engines are oversized. And so all about this design is about power and speed.
And General Grievous is the general of the Separatist army. He was an alien who, like Darth Vader, he had to replace a lot of his parts. So he's mostly droid when we see him. And his two arms split into 4 arms, and he's got 4 lightsabers. A lot of things about the prequels kind of hint at what's coming. General Grievous is kind of a precursor to Vader in those respects. Jedi Interceptor. The first time we see this ship is in Revenge of the Sith.
One of the interesting things is that in the design language, we're actually starting to sort of tie in story elements that, the good guys become the bad guys. And you'll notice in the Jedi Interceptor that we're really starting to tie and bridge the Jedi Starfighter with the TIE Fighters. You'll notice that the wings, when they unfold, have sort of early distinct silhouettes of the TIE Fighter, and then the cockpit is actually starting to become a ball. And one of the other interesting facts is that the R2 unit can't fit in it. The body is actually too thin, so the R2 unit has to be a really short one.
We got him, R2.
The P-38 fighter, the original inspiration was the P-38 Lightning, and that's where you see the twin tails on there. And as the design evolved, slowly we start to modify it so that we took the round wings off, and then we actually removed the connecting tail piece. But you can see connecting elements like the engine scoops are actually scoops on the P-38 Lightning.
This is the Techno-Union fighter. The first time we see this is in Revenge of the Sith. It has a very Flash Gordon-esque feel to it. And George was very inspired by Flash Gordon. I think Star Wars itself is sort of inspired by Flash Gordon and George's love of it. And that can be seen in ships like the Techno-Union fighter. V-Wing from Revenge of the Sith, so you can kind of get a hint at what's going to come in A New Hope. But I think this probably is the most extreme. If you look at it head on, has more of that TIE fighter silhouette where you kind of see the H with the ball in the middle.
The First Order TIE Fighter. In keeping to our design philosophy, where 7, 8, and 9 were more contemporary times, we wanted to update the TIE Fighter. And part of the thinking was that maybe the TIE Fighter for the First Order, they made it more robust, using new materials to make it faster and leaner and more strong. And so part of the idea was that we actually took the classic design of the TIE Fighter and just beefed it up, changed the material, changed the configuration of the colors.
Whoa, this thing really moves!
The First Order Special Forces TIE Fighter.
We distinguished them by giving them red, but then we also gave them external magazines for their weaponry.
The other thing that distinguishes the Special Forces TIE Fighter is it actually has 2 seats back-to-back in the cockpit. You've got the gunner in the back and you've got the pilot in the front, so that's when Poe and Finn are actually piloting when they escape.
Did you see that?
The T-70 Resistance X-Wing. The inspiration for this was actually Ralph McQuarrie's original painting of the X-Wing, where he actually had the twin turbine of the engine split down the middle for the split wing. And it was a very sleek design. It really looked like an F1 car mixed with a spaceship.
The T-70 is a little bit obsolete in the Star Wars universe, even at the time of The Force Awakens. The Resistance still doesn't get all the new stuff, right?
Yeah, exactly. Part of the charm of the T-70 design is that it evokes the original trilogy design, that it's scrappy. The Resistance at this time didn't have a whole lot of resources, so they have leftovers. The TIE Striker from Rogue One. One of the most interesting things about the TIE Striker is that we wanted to come up with a new idea for a TIE fighter, and we thought, how would it actually operate in the atmosphere? And so we turned the wings up, so they are almost like wings up on top, and then the ball is suspended below. And so it has a slight hang glider configuration, and it really sort of helps to communicate the idea that this TIE fighter, this unique TIE fighter, operates in the atmosphere.
Behind you!
The Resistance A-Wing. The great part about this design is it really evokes the original A-Wing design, but I like the engines are even more beefed up than the original.
And the great thing is that it is sort of the next evolution. It's the next model. And in this one in particular, you can see the power and the speed in terms of the form language.
Resistance Bomber, and the first time we see this is at the very beginning of The Last Jedi.
And one of the interesting things about it is that we want to evoke sort of old technology. So this is obviously an old bomber, and the vertical spine is actually almost like an ammunition cartridge of a gun.
The great thing about the bomb magazine pointing downwards is it kind of gives you that hint that the artificial gravity well is going to be used, so that way the bombs can actually fall in space.
Follow my lead.
The TIE Silencer. Basically, the concept for that was we wanted to give Kylo something really unique, and we just basically took the TIE Interceptor and just stretched it even more to make it even more aggressive.
It also reminds me of Kylo's mask because you see the silver framework around the cockpit, and that kind of reminds me of the silver around his mask.
When we design spaceships, they do tie into the personality of the character that's going to be piloting it. And for Kylo's ship, it was really trying to evoke the menace that we see in Kylo's mask. And so how do we translate that into a spaceship form? And part of that was just the form language, just making it more aggressive, making it more pointed, so it looks like it's a flying dagger.
This is the TIE Brute, and the first time we see it is in Solo, during the Kessel Run. This is really interesting to me because this is the first really asymmetrical TIE design. The bomber, if you drew it shorthand, was still, everything else has been symmetrical.
And it was an interesting play to try to put a separate ball turret up for the gun. And it sort of is interesting in the sense that it still feels very TIE Fighter-ish, but yet it looks like it's a more brutish version of it. The Resistance B-Wing, we first see that in the Rise of Skywalker, and it's basically an updated model from the B-Wing that we saw in Return of the Jedi. The updates are primarily just, thinning down the shapes, making it a little bit sleeker, and then adding new coloration.
The Resistance Y-Wing, first introduced in Rise of Skywalker. Just like the Resistance X-Wing, this one also evokes a little bit more of that original Ralph McQuarrie painting.
TIE Dagger, the first time we see it is in Rise of Skywalker, and it's basically the next evolution of the TIE Fighter. Part of the idea was that we wanted to give it a very angular, aggressive look, and so we took the triangular shapes of the Star Destroyers and put them into the wings.
And the red markings on the TIE Dagger denote that they're Sith.
The TIE Whisper, the first time we see it is in the Rise of Skywalker. Kylo Ren has a modified version with longer wings.
The design for this really feels like the original TIE, but you can see it's got the extra armor around the cockpit, and it's red, so it's evil. We have 2 bonus ships that are technically not starfighters, but they're so cool there's no way we're not including them. The first one is the Ghost from Star Wars Rebels, but you can see it fight in Rogue One and in Rise of Skywalker. That ship was originally designed for Rebels. It's piloted by Hera Syndulla and the rest of the Ghost crew. And then for the design of that, originally, Filoni was really drawn to that diamond shape. So from the top down, you can see it's got that distinct, perfect diamond silhouette, but he really wanted it to feel like the Falcon. And it was also inspired by B-17 bombers from World War II. That's where you get the rounded cockpit from the front.
The Millennium Falcon. It is probably the most iconic design for Star Wars and one of my favorite. I mean, it's so timeless. I remember when I first saw it, it was just like, wow, that's a ship that I want to be on. The original design actually was the Blockade Runner, and it had the very distinct Falcon cockpit on there. But then George wanted to create something that was a little bit more unique, and he decided that, let's keep the cockpit, but let's turn it into something more iconic. And so he suggested that perhaps we should make it round, more like a saucer. And so Joe Johnston, when he designed it again, he actually gave it some front mandibles to give it some direction. And by combining that with an offset cockpit, it gave it a really distinct personality that was unlike anything that we had seen at that time.
I like the Falcon a lot because it feels very fast. It's got a subtle curve to the top and the bottom. It kind of evokes that kind of saucer feel, but also makes it feel very fast. I love the engines on the Falcon. I love that there's a strip of blue light in the back.
Part of the charm of the Millennium Falcon is that it is a character. It is a Star Wars character, and so I want to imbue it with a lot of personality. And like a character, it evolves. There's a character arc to it. And so one of the first tasks that we had was for Solo, we want to see an earlier version of the Millennium Falcon, sort of the cleaner version prior to Han Solo coming in and sort of hot rodding it. And so in Solo, you see all the panels are intact, and there's actually the escape pod that actually fits between the front mandibles. And as you progress into the original trilogy, it becomes more beaten up.
You came in that thing? You're braver than I thought.
It becomes more robust. You can see Han's touch in terms of how he beefed up the engine, made it more robust, made it more practical in some ways. And then moving forward to episodes 7, 8, and 9, you can start to see how the Falcon has been repaired after all its various adventures, where it knocks off its radar dish in Return of the Jedi and how there's a new radar dish. And so all those little evolutionary things help to inform the evolution of the character of the Falcon. And it's interesting because the Falcon is so iconic that even with all these slight variations, you know that it's the Falcon. And one of the beautiful things about what we're doing now for Rise of Skywalker is that we're consolidating all those designs to create the iconic Millennium Falcon.
What a piece of junk!
She'll make 0.5 past light speed. She may not look like much, but she's got it where it counts, kid.
That was every starfighter in the live-action Star Wars films.
And we can't wait to show you what we have coming up next.